What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today's episode comes actually from a fellow Instagram listener. So thank you very much for sending this topic over. And what we are covering is mini cuts versus traditional cuts, for lack of a better term, meaning an extended period of a calorie deficit for fat loss, which we will jump into and define a little bit as we dive into this topic. But as always, before we get going, Brian, can you kick us off with some updates, please?
Yeah. So I want to start with kind of a recap on a follow-up on the blood work stuff that we were talking about. And so we put out kind of a plea to the world for somebody to refer us somebody that understands kind of what we do, but also understands blood work at like a super deep level. And so I had two people reach out. One was Shantae, our girl, the movement maestro, and she referred me to a man named Mitchell Rasmussen, who runs a functional medicine practice in Denver. And she said that he is as passionate about what he does as I am about what I do. So I figured that was a good cosign by her. And so I contacted him, and I have a consult set up to go over some stuff next week. So hopefully we'll be able to update that when the time comes. And then also one of our dear listeners, actually the wife of, she is a listener, but also the wife of somebody that subscribes to the Evolved program. His name is Eric. I'm not sure what hers is, but he is a ER doc in Colorado. And he is also, as I understand, relatively deep into like kind of like Peter Attia longevity assessment stuff, and has been considering opening up a practice, etc. So I was able to connect with him, and he said he may even like at some point in the future have a lab with like VO2 max testing and stuff like that too. So I think those are going to be like two super cool connections that can try to drive this whole understanding of my blood work thing forward. So yeah, that's update one. And let me see what my next update is.
I have a question before you jump into your next update. I was talking with Shantae as well, and she's fantastic. Is your consult virtual or in person with him?
Yeah, virtual, because I'm obviously not in Denver right now.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's like a 40-minute drive.
So no, I didn't know. San Diego.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I'm a moron. Okay, cool. Yeah. I was like, oh, ironically, the next time I will be back in the States, it will be in Denver. So I was like, oh, perfect. But I didn't know that there was a virtual aspect. So I should follow up with him prior to then when I will be back in the States.
Yeah, he said they do both virtual and in person. So I'm sure you can hook it up that way too. Cool. Yeah, so second update is kind of just some quick recap of some cardio things from this week, because I have 3 kind of cool cardio sessions that went down. First off, I did my zone 5 work with sand sprints, which is one of those like unique privileges that you get only when you're in San Diego. And so I had to take advantage of it. And so I did a few like progressively more challenging 100-meter runs, just to like make sure my hamstring was good and stuff. And I had a little bit of trepidation on the first couple steps each sprint, just to just make sure it's good, because it happened on the second or third step last time. So I just wanted to make sure the first few steps are good. And then I was kind of able to release into it and be confident from there. And then I did some like suicide, as we used to call them, shuttle runs, 10 yards and out, 10 yards and back, 20 yards and back, 30 yards and back. And those both were like in the 20 to 25 second range. And so that was perfect. And it got my heart rate up into the low 180s, which was super dope. Perfect for my zone 5 work, and really the type of training I like to do. Like I really enjoy that, work for 20 or 30 seconds and then rest for like 2.5 or 3 minutes and fully recover. So that was zone 5 work. Today I did a bike ride that was 75 minutes long. It was one of my longest mountain biking rides so far. And I was in zone 2 for 45 minutes of the 75, which totally doesn't count because you're up and down and you're out of the zone and and all that stuff. So you don't say, hey, I did 45 minutes of zone 2. But I think that there's this balance that I've been getting at with, how I'm doing some of these like circuits and stuff like that. There's this balance of, okay, I understand that it should be done one way, but like I can get what I believe is 90-ish% of the benefits by doing it in a manner that I find significantly more enjoyable. And so the opportunity cost for me makes it way worth it to kind of just do some fun stuff along with the more structured, like single modality zone 2. And so, yeah, those, and then I also did another like more standard zone 2 and like a circuit zone 2, but a good week where I hit my 3 zone 2 sessions and my 1 zone 5. And it was also a weekend in which I drank and ate like crap. So since I've been out here, I've been super healthy and really eating well for the most part, not drinking alcohol. And then this weekend we had some friends in town and I went out to Shore Club, of all places. And I know Aaron's loving that because there's so many memories there. But I had a whole day. I drank 5 drinks in one day, which is like way more than I usually do. That's like a probably once a quarter amount of alcohol for me, maybe a few times a year. And I felt like ass the next day. And then all my markers of health on my smart device also knew I felt like ass because my HRV went down. My resting heart rate went up like 10 beats per minute for 2 days. Like literally it was in the high 30s. Now it's in the high 40s. And then finally today it dropped back down into the high 30s again. But yeah, it's weird what alcohol does, man.
Question real quick. Yeah. That resting heart rate, when is that? Is that like that can't be an average over the day, right? That's like a morning sort of thing. Or
so I actually, my lowest heart rate is in the middle of the night while sleeping because I always get those low heart rate notifications.
Yeah.
But they don't actually track that as resting heart rate. Mm-hmm. Resting heart rate is pinged throughout the day when I've been sitting, not moving for at least 10 minutes, I think is what it is.
And that's when you're picking up the high 30s?
So I had 139 heart rate before this weekend during the day. And then it went up to the high 40s for a couple days. And then just today it pinged me at 10 a.m. with a flat 40. So, yeah, it's pretty low again. It just was up for a couple days. And I also had my blood pressure go up a little too, to like normal levels. So it went from like 110/75 to 120/80. And I was like, oh, I'm so normal. This sucks.
That was going to be my next question. Is your blood pressure a little bit low? Because I mean, that's a really low heart rate for like what, like if you were like, a Lance Armstrong or someone like that, I'd be like, okay, I mean, I could, potentially see that. But for the amount of muscle you have and the type of activity that you generally do, I was surprised that it is that low.
Yeah, I've always had a low resting heart rate. I don't know. It's one of the weird things that like, yeah, it leans toward me being like aerobically fit, but then all the other metrics don't lean towards me being aerobically fit.
Like the actual doing aerobics parts of it. Right. Like you're primed until you get going. And then it's like, yeah, it doesn't work that way.
But my blood pressure, like it's low, but not like extremely low. Like I would say the lowest it gets, is occasionally I'll see like a 105/72 or something like that. Kim's ubiquitously every night when she does it, when I do it now, hers is like 89/62 or something like that.
Yeah, same. Jenny's is quite low as well. Like when we like tested it one time at some like little community thing when we were walking through, and I was like, do that again. Like I like almost didn't believe it at first.
Yeah. Like you should be dead right now.
Yeah, I'm like what? And then I immediately I'm glued to my phone looking at things because I'm like I'm not sure if that's why that is that low sort of thing. So
yeah. Jump over to you real quick for some updates, and then I have 2 more really quick ones.
Yeah, so I will start with my gain season here of winter, late winter, I should say, is going well. Coming back from few days away of the trip of basically Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I historically always will lose a bunch of weight on trips, and I was concerned about that. But I did make a note to eat a little bit more this trip purposefully for that. And I did get one really good training session in, and then one kind of half-assed one because all the equipment was broken and I really didn't have many options. But I'm sitting high 204s, low 205s like consistently now. This week will be my highest average again, which I'm excited for. And then we kind of set our target for capping out this, or not necessarily capping, but setting our target somewhere between like 204 and 208 for this period. So as kind of getting towards those higher ends, can reevaluate and then potentially may even use a mini cut to then push a little bit higher if we kind of so choose so. So that's the first update. Second update was my birthday on Saturday. Was very, very cool day. Definitely like a lifetime bucket list sort of day. For those who didn't listen to the last episode, we went to Komodo National Park, which is in Komodo Island, which is one of the many islands of Indonesia, where the Komodo dragons still roam free. It was really cool and honestly absolutely terrifying. One of my favorite things about like, you know, traveling through like Southeast Asia and a lot of these places is like the general like safety net that we have in the United States is just not there in other places. And you would like walk around with a ranger, but there'd be like 30 people to a ranger. And it wasn't very like a formal process. And then like we would find one, they just roam. They're not like caged or anything. They just literally just roam. And then he like draws a line with a stick and was like, okay, don't get closer than that line. But then the line is like 3.5 feet away. And you're like, yeah, why would I get closer than this fucking line? You know what I mean? And it's not these things are like 2 feet long, 3 feet long. It's like you and I, Brian, sized laying on the fucking ground. Like that's how big these dragons are. And they are deadly. They're very deadly. They're like pretty much a one bite, one kill sort of thing. And then you like draw a line. And then because our tour guide was actually a ranger as well, we got to go first and get the most pictures and everything like that. Cause he was like hooking us up and he'd be like, no, get closer, get closer. I'm like, I don't fucking want to, dude. Cause on the way there, we had like all this time to kill talking to him. And I'm like, so, you know, has anyone ever gotten bit? And he's like, oh yeah, many times. And I was like, when was the last time? He's like, in 2017, a guy from Singapore died. And then he's like, get closer, get closer.
Right,
I'm like,
right.
you just told me some dude died like 5 years ago coming like a tourist coming to the park. I don't want to get fucking closer. Because it's not like it's a sweet death or like a quick painless death. They inject you with a venom and then a bacteria that just slowly paralyzes you over days, and it has an anticoagulant in it, so your body will never stop the bleeding. Yeah, and then like I mean, you are out there, Indonesia. Like you fly to this island Flores in a town Labuan Bajo, which is like the nearest like city-esque thing where it has an airport. But then from there to get to Komodo Island, it was a 3.5 hour boat ride. So like, wow. I mean, you were out there. And yeah, it was a really, really cool day. Got to see 6 of them, which our tour guide, who is a ranger who works in the park, said the most he ever saw in a day was 7. We got to see 6, and 2 of them were like wild on a different island as we were like driving by. Wow. So you have to do that. There's on the island as well, there's like wild deer who are like the main prey, and also wild boar who are also like the secondary prey. And we got to see like 2 wild boar like taking off through the island as well, because you like kind of walk around like a little hiking trail, and that was pretty cool. And I mean, yeah, they were just massive and absolutely terrifying.
Did you get to see them eat it all?
No, he said they only eat like once or twice a month, but they can eat up to their 80% of their body weight in a single like feeding session. So like they basically just like camouflage in things and wait for like prey to like come within a striking distance, strike, bite them, and then they just like trail them for like 5 or 6 days until they die. And then they eat them alive. They don't even kill them before eating them.
That's so savage.
It's so savage. And the last one we saw, it smelled like really, really bad as we were like walking up to it. And he was like, you smell that? And I was like, oh yeah, I smell that. He's like, something's dying nearby. I was like, sick.
So cool.
Yeah.
So glad I don't live on Komodo Island.
Yeah. And there is like people, there's a village, people do live, like a very small village, people live there. Yeah, brutal life. Very cool to visit for a day. Would not recommend for more than a very small amount of time.
Yeah,
but a very cool trip.
That is nuts.
And then the only other update I have is very recently I've discovered a newfound appreciation for an old hammer strength, ISO incline. I shouldn't say an old one. It is a brand new piece of equipment or remanufactured. But these were pieces that I just like. I'm sure. I mean, we've all used the hammer strength, like ISO presses, sort of things, and I've used them to various enjoyment and non-enjoyment in my history. But one of the things that I'm really forever grateful from the N1, practical is just learning how to line things up. Okay, this is the movement pattern that I want to perform. This is the machinery I have to perform it. How can I, make this best for it? And that really goes like so far, because I was like, okay, here is the pathway that this arm moves on. How do I need to orient myself to get myself in a really good incline position to do this? So I'm like, I played around with it for a few minutes, adjusted the seat. It naturally converges. I'm like, okay, this is good. And have had 3 amazing sessions on it with like a super, super good stimulus, like massive chest pump. And I shouldn't even say unfortunately. Fortunately, it really is like what and how to set things up can really, really change the outcome of a movement. And I'm happy to rediscover things that I had written off through ignorance in my past, and then just becoming wiser and being able to then teach that, onto my clients and stuff like that.
Hell yeah. I love that. The chest press machine is one in general is like the biggest thing I feel like I'm missing from my home gym. So when I hear about one that just like hits just right, it always makes me think like, ooh, I could get one of those,
I still think my favorite is the upright cable one though. If I had to like pick one, I think that might be it.
What, just like with the cables and the handles, like the cast handles? Yeah. No, I love that too. And I miss that because in a commercial gym, like I obviously could drag a bench over and set that up. But I'm just much more likely to pick the converging machine that exists because it's just much more accessible and easy to load, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, totally. I'm just excited to get back home and use that one for sure. Speaking of getting back home, today was the first day where we were like kind of in a moment like, oh man, I'm kind of ready to go home. Cause there's just like, how PB is just, there's always shit going on in PB, like constantly. There's no quiet. It's just like a big bustling, growing town of some sort. It's like construction and this and that. And so today in our place, they're digging up the road in front of us. So the entire road in front of us is closed. There's like all these massive excavators around. They turned off our water because they're digging up the road. So we have no water. And then they did something and they set off a fire alarm that went off for over an hour. It literally would not stop. It was in the building and it was in our actual apartment. And like literally, it was just a moment where for an hour, we were just like, wow, this is insane. We need to get me back to my quiet life in Boulder. But anyways, speaking of kind of N1, as you mentioned them, one of the other updates I wanted to mention real quick is just that N1 CASM is having a sort of debate thing against Dr. Pat Davidson in March 25th, I believe. And so it's happening locally in Boulder. You can also buy tickets for it virtually if you're not able to get to Boulder. But I just think it'd be a really cool event for people to go to if anyone's listening in the Denver area, or if you want to check it out virtually. They come from very different backgrounds in that Pat was like a strongman and a kind of all around functional fitness type athlete. And Cassim was obviously hypertrophy biomechanics guy, but they both want to optimize things for what they do. And so they see optimization very differently. And anyway, I just think it'd be a cool event. So if anyone's interested in doing that, make sure you go attend that. Tell them I sent you. And then my final update is all of the people that suggested the yoga block on the Arsenal hack squat underneath the shoulder pads and then flatten out the foot plate because now you have that extra distance saved. That was huge. It really helped a lot. it wasn't perfect, but it was like 95% perfect and way, way better than it was without the yoga blocks and with the foot plate up super steep. So very much appreciate that, especially Tim Schultz. He was the first one to send that to me, and then 2 other people did as well, but much appreciate that. And the hack squat gains will cometh. And that really is all I have. So this is going to be a cool episode with mini cuts and traditional cuts, because I think a lot of people don't really fully understand the difference between the two of them. It's like, oh, one's short and one's long, but there's a lot more that goes into that. So maybe if you want to kick us off with kind of some basics here or jump into one.
Yeah, let's do it. So to kind of start off, what we want out of this episode is to not be like, this one is bad, this one is good, anything like that. They both have their utility. And really the goal of the episode is to kind of paint the picture of when either is most contextually appropriate to use, right? So that's the kind of the first thing we want to kick it off with. And this is, I'm going to say something like very, very basic here, is in this context, the term cut pretty much just means hypocaloric state, calorie deficit, right? So to just define it as like mini cut is just a shorter period of time spent in a deficit. What we will define as like a traditional or regular cut is just a longer period of time spent in a calorie deficit. From there, we will obviously get much more nuanced in our explanations of each. So I guess let's start off with the mini cut here first. In the easiest way to differentiate is really kind of, like I said, time. So with a mini cut, we're generally looking at about 3 to 6 weeks in duration. I can only think of like one context where I might use it less than 3 weeks because of the extremes that you would have to kind of push with that, and maybe like a 7 or 8, but very, very unlikely there. And then with a more traditional cut, we're generally looking at 8 weeks to anywhere up to like 24 weeks, 30 weeks, or potentially longer with things like diet breaks, refeeds, etc., depending on the start point of the individual and the ambitiousness of their goals. Do you want to add anything there, Brian, before I keep going?
No, that's good, man. Keep at it.
Okay. So next, what we'll touch on is pretty much the goals in terms of rate of loss. So with a traditional cut, the widely accepted kind of threshold is 0.5% to 1% of total body mass loss per week. Using the example of someone who is starting at 200 pounds, this pretty much boils down to 1 to 2 pounds per week. 1 pound on the obviously low end, 2 pounds on the high end, again, for that kind of traditional cut. Now with the mini cut, because the time duration is shorter, the aggressiveness of the rate of loss needs to be increased so that we end up with more than 3 pounds lost or something like that. That pretty much is completely insignificant for an attempt. So with that, there's some different numbers that are thrown around, but generally anywhere from about like 1% per week to 2% per week. So, and that is of total body mass loss. So again, using that example of someone who's at 200 pounds, we're looking at essentially 2 pounds per week on the low end, and then 4 pounds per week on the high end. The last thing that I'll kind of touch on here before I kick it back over to Brian for some things is the mini cut is very unsustainable. It is unsustainable in nature because its duration is inherently shorter at about a maximum of like 6 weeks per se. The traditional cut is, I will call, less unsustainable, but I wouldn't necessarily call it sustainable because there is no real reason you should need to sustain a calorie deficit for more than like 6, 8 months or something like that, unless you're competing in a natural bodybuilding show, which by no means would we describe as sustainable, or you're covering a very large fat loss for a health improvement, standpoint, maybe coming from like 350 pounds to 220 pounds or something like that. Again, the words of sustainable versus unsustainable is going to be context dependent, but I very much so wanted to present that information.
Yeah, totally. That's great. I have a client right now that's just wrapping up. He's in the final stages of a mini cut. And so kind of to the point that you made, he took a long time to gain. We were gaining for months and months and months. And then I think he gained, 8 or 9 pounds over many, many, many months. And literally in a matter of 2.5 weeks, he slashed basically all the weight that he gained. I mean, not all the weight he gained, but he most of it, right? Like he's an advanced athlete. He's not going to gain a ton of muscle, but he like went up to 170, low 170s, and then down to 163. And so 8 to 9 pounds in 2.5 weeks. And we talk a lot about on here how the first pounds, when you're going from gaining where you're just pounding food and you're getting a ton of glycogen and just all the water that comes with that. In his first like few days, he dumped like 4 or 5 pounds of just that stuff. And then over the course of 2.5 weeks, he lost, 3 to 5 pounds, something like that. So definitely more aggressive, but also understanding that it's short. You can do some real damage and drop damage being a good thing and drop a bunch of weight in a short amount of time. So I have like kind of a theoretical question that I just thought of. And I know we haven't even talked about the long cut per se yet. But why would we not want to just kind of always be gaining and maybe just occasionally do a mini cut? Like, why is that not a better approach than gaining for a longer period of time and then doing a longer prolonged cut?
There's a couple reasons. So the first one is, so this one, again, places where I will say the research doesn't quite support the theories. This one is there, partitioning ratio, right? So from the most recent research that I've kind of seen on it, the partitioning ratio concept doesn't hold a lot of water. For what it's worth, I kind of don't believe that research. And there's many others who I've talked to who feel the same way. So take that with a giant grain of salt. My opinion, I'm saying. Essentially, that as we have been gaining, eventually you're going to start putting on an appreciable amount of body fat with that gain. And the concept of the partitioning ratio is that as you get fatter, the more the ratio of fat-free mass to fat mass as you continue to gain worsens. So with that, and so there's that part A of it. The part B is we do for many of us, right? We're doing this bodybuilding hobbyist sort of pursuit for body composition, for physical appearance, because we enjoy it. When you're 20+% body fat and you can't really see any of your muscles or anything like that, it will challenge your commitment to the gain. Let's put it that way. And if with part B and kind of tandem with part A, if you do believe or not believe, I should say, with the partitioning ratio standpoint, it can be a utility for you to extend the runway of your gaining period without becoming unnecessarily, over fat in pursuit of that. And another kind of aspect to bring into two more that I can think of off the top of my head from a health standpoint, right? I don't really, and I can speak to kind of my personal standpoint and what I do with my clients. I'm not really ever going to be pushing a client past 20% body fat for the sake of gains with the concerns of health standpoint, right? Like lipid levels, blood sugars, insulin, that sort of thing. So it can help from a little bit of like a health resensitization standpoint. And then lastly, when we're gaining for months and months and months, food generally has to keep increasing and increasing and increasing. And unfortunately, our GIs are just not a bottomless pit, right? We take stress in that. Our appetite bottoms out. Digestion quality can severely tank and that sort of thing. And that can be a great time where potentially a mini cut can serve as more of a purpose than just the reducing the fat levels, but also to just give your GI a break and help with some appetite stimulation as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure if we're necessarily talking the exact same language. I was more referring to to if you were to like take somebody up to 17% and then mini cut them down to 12, and then up to 17, mini cut them down to 12, up to 17, mini cut them down to 12. So you're basically like, you take a 200-pound athlete that's gaining 5% body fat over a long period of time, but then slicing it off in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks and then going right back to building back up to 17% again.
And then what is the question with that?
Why would you not do that? Like, why would you want to do like a longer term, prolonged period of gaining and then a longer diet when you could just do like these super aggressive short diets as opposed to these like longer strung out diets?
I mean, timing of when they want to be lean, events, that sort of thing. The cumulative effects of that much food for people, like that's one that personally like gets to me more than anything. Like I'm just so sick of eating so much food. The rate of gain as well too. So like if we're mini cutting, you know, from 17% down to 12, and I know you just kind of like pulled numbers out, but that's a very, very aggressive, you know, mini cut. It probably, I'm not confident we could do that in like 3 weeks. That might be closer to like a 5 or 6. You will lose some muscle mass with that aggressiveness of a cut as well. And then your rate of gain will have to be faster, and a faster rate of gain will produce more body fat accumulation. So you're kind of overlapping a little bit more of the like
different stimuli or whatever.
Yeah.
The
the
messaging. Yeah.
Not necessarily the messaging, but like, hey, every time we mini cut, we lose some muscle mass, but then our rate of gain is so quick to get back to that 17%, we're putting on some body fat again. So like we're needlessly overlapping some muscle mass loss with some body fat accumulation, as opposed to if we just went slower for longer, our rate of gain doesn't need to be as aggressive. And that way our partitioning ratio should be more favorable in that way.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really think of the aspect of like the individual who wants to be lean at a certain time. It just like, yeah. Like if you could go slowly from 12 to 17%, like you're not rushing it. You're just kind of gradually, like maybe over 3 months, working your way up from 12% to 17%, but then you slice off that 5% in like a month, and then you're right back to another 3 month of like slow gain.
I think that 3 months is really, really fast. Very, very fast.
Yeah, actually that is fast, because it would be like 10 pounds basically. Yeah, so maybe it's 6 months, but either way, you go up for 6 months, you go down for 1, up for 6 months, down for 1, as opposed to up for 9, down for 4 or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, it's going to be, the individual variation is going to be huge. Things like, you know, other external commitments, right? And in many cases, like other external commitments, like your life dictates a lot of these sorts of things, especially with like the season of when somebody wants to look a certain way. Like only probably, I should say, instead of only, in like a pure bodybuilding world, or someone's like, I don't care about summer. All I care about is stepping on stage in 19 months. You know what I mean? Yeah. Where you get like someone who's immune to the desires of, you know, seasons and that sort of thing. So many times like the seasons do play a role, or something like a wedding, you know, some trip with friends from college, and you want to be in the better shape than all of your other like college buddies. Like I have a client right now, like when he signed up with me, like literally like almost a year ago, he said March 2024, 2023, whatever. This March, the March we're in right now, I have a trip with friends. Like I want to be in good shape for it, you know? And like, that is a very common use case that will change the planning of these things.
Yeah, no, that's a super good point. I think I oftentimes think like the robotic bodybuilder who's just like, I want to put on as much muscle as I can, regardless of the outside stimuli around me. And so in that case, like maybe there's more rationale for that like 6 up, 1 down approach. But when you know that, you know, summer and spring are the times you want to be lean, that's like a reason I've been doing my cut every year in that time frame. So yeah, totally. Good points.
Yeah. And I think to kind of button that part up before we move on, I do firmly believe, like, if you are in this one is heavily anecdote, based. If you're younger, if you're 18, 19, 21, something like that, and let's say you're, 5'9" to like 6 foot, and you're like 160 pounds, 670 pounds, like rather lean, and you want to be like, hey, I want to be 185 pounds, 190 pounds, like, jacked sort of thing. I am in the camp of like, you go on 2 years of just trying to put weight on sort of thing. And I think trying to close a gap of like, I want 20 pounds of muscle and doing the like gain, mini cut, lean for summer, like it's going to take you years, years and years, not like 2 years, like probably like 7, 8, 9 sort of thing. Just slowly eat, increase, focus on not getting over fat, keeping body fat percentage under 20 approximately, but just training and eating and actually accruing that tissue. That's what I did. Like I was never, once I started eating and lifting at like seriously, when I was like 16, I wasn't lean until I was 20, 25. Yeah. Pretty much. And then that was kind of by accident sort of thing of just not knowing and training too much. But yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I got jacked by accident.
Well, I got lean by accident. Yeah, really. It was like it was the CrossFit and cutting out an entire food group. And I was like, oh wow, look what happened. But yeah, it was a very long period of just being 20% body fat and training all the time and eating.
Yep. That's where the best gains are, man.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered the mini cut, pretty well. Or no, sorry, I had some pros and cons I wanted to touch on here, and best use cases, right? So the use cases that I see that are outside of that, extending the gains, the runway for gains, is if you are already in a striking distance, and you have some sort of previously unplanned event or something come up, or you are in a weight class based sport and you join a meet or competition kind of last minute. So the use case that I have used it with most recently is I have a client who's an actor. And because of his kind of physique, he gets, I don't know if I want to say that necessarily the term typecast, but kind of typecast for roles that are someone with a good physique. Given that he has to go up against other people with good physique, we stay within like striking distance, but not too lean that we will negatively impact, libido in these sorts of things, which he had done in the past and was a big part of us working together, getting him away from that. So we stay at a striking distance and try and keep maintenance or calories right about like a maintenance plus. Now, with the nature of his style of work, like we might have some audition and then maybe a role that land very, very quickly. And we're like, hey, I have 2.5 weeks until this thing. Like we need to get me as shredded as possible. Like that is a very good use case for this. But when we're not doing that, we spend all of our time kind of having the gun loaded in case we need to kind of pull it sort of thing. We're not like fucking around at 8% body fat. We stay up a little bit before so that we can have food focus and all of that stuff, not a prominent part of life, so that if we need to like quickly pull the trigger, get super lean, we're in a very good standpoint to be able to do that. So that is the one that I most recently kind of use it with. Or like I said, the weight class sport where you might have just been a little bit over and then join a meet last minute or whatever. And we want to just get in and not try a massive water cut 24, 48 hours before, with the potential of kind of tanking performance there. Any other situations that you can think of, Brian?
No, those are all pretty solid.
Cool. And then I'll quickly cover some kind of pros and cons. So the biggest pro that I see is it's very mentally easy to buy into it because we know it's a very short duration of time. A maximum of 6 weeks, we can plan, probably keep food variation very, very simple, because with that shorter kind of time period, now kind of switching over to the con, is our margins for success are much smaller, because we have a short window of time. We can't afford to have weeks where like, oh, I just didn't track things accurately, or I was really bored with my eating, or, those other very common problems that arise in a calorie deficit. We have a short window of time. We are on the gas pedal. Our margins for success are small. We need very high rates of adherence for the execution to work out well. So because of that, the margin of error, like I said, is much smaller typically than otherwise. And then kind of moving over towards the traditional cut. Brian, do you have anything in terms of pros and cons before we do that?
Pros and cons of the mini cut?
The mini cut, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much nailed it. It certainly just requires you to know that you're probably going to be like a little bit hungry. And a lot of times when you come off of a prolonged period of eating a lot, you expect the first early stages of the diet to be relatively easy because you're just kind of tired of eating, so to speak. But when you drop calories that abruptly, that quickly, I feel like there is hunger that comes along with that. And so maybe like it would be prudent to plan for that in making a relatively extreme shift in the quality of the foods that you eat. So inevitably you're going to need to just start eating more filling foods than you were before.
Yeah. So with that's a really good point that Brian brought up. So it's kind of the opposite of what often you would think happens immediately once coming from like a very high energy availability to a much lower. And with the mini cut, we're talking just to ballpark something like potentially 1,000 calorie deficit sort of overnight. So very, very aggressive, maybe even more. The hunger will hit faster, and then it will kind of level out a little bit because our bodies are incredibly responsive and adaptive. And same way where how sometimes when you get into a calorie surplus, in the beginning, you feel kind of like full for a couple of days. You're like, man, this is a lot of food, but then your body gets used to it and then your hunger will pick up. We basically experience the opposite as it drops out. We get very, very hungry quickly, and then it kind of dissipates a little bit. And you should expect hunger with a mini cut. 100% expect hunger pretty much daily. And there's obviously things you can do maximizing volume of foods, like some of the best there are going to be strawberries and watermelon, but in some degree, yes, you should expect the hunger for sure. Those are really good points to bring up. Thanks, Brian.
Yep.
Now shifting over to the traditional cut. Are you good with that?
Yeah, man.
Cool. So like I said in the beginning, we're generally looking at a much longer period of time. So anywhere from 6 to really 8 weeks on the short end, up to 24 plus or even longer if we have something like I used that example of a natural bodybuilding competition, or if you are coming from let's call it just a straight up unhealthy lifestyle and you have a lot of weight to lose. It may be much longer, but generally correlating with things like diet breaks and that sort of thing. Now, the difference with the traditional cut is our aim is to visually reduce body fat percentage to a markedly notable degree. With a mini cut, you are obviously reducing body fat, but you're not essentially going from like an identity of, one person to a different sort of person. With the traditional cut, like, yes, that is generally more of the goal, right? We are losing a larger overall percentage of total body mass, and it just takes a much longer time to do that. Now, to reiterate what I kind of said earlier, a target weekly reduction is 0.5% to 1% of total body mass per week. And again, just to reiterate, using that same example, at 200 pounds, we're looking at 1 to 2 pounds per week. Now, it's also important to note that as you have successful weeks in doing so, your total body mass starts to reduce. As that total body mass starts to reduce, that 0.5% to 1% is also a smaller absolute number. So let's say we go from 200 pounds to 180 pounds, and maybe about 170 is our approximate end goal. 0.5% to 1% is no longer 1 to 2 pounds at 180 pounds. It's essentially like 20% less than that. So those numbers will start to slide as your weight does slide. And then with the, Brian, question?
No question. I was just going to note that's very true. And also the compensation, the metabolic compensation that occurs makes it that much harder to achieve an even smaller amount of weight loss. So what was 1 to 2 pounds that was coming off easily now becomes 0.9 to 1.8 or whatever the math is there. And it's even harder to lose that smaller amount of weight. So I'm sure you were going to get into that, but I just I was giggling about it.
Yeah, the longer it goes, the harder it is to achieve success at less. And what's very funny is it's not funny. It's actually kind of fucking sad. As if you flip that, the better you get at building muscle, the harder it gets to build more muscle, and the less muscle there is left to build. Yeah. And then you completely flip that. Okay, I'm 6 weeks into my fat loss phase. I have my momentum. My habits are down. I'm committed. I had some, the kind of rookie successes. Now, in order to continue to further facilitate in that and get leaner, my effort needs to be even more. There is less fat to lose, and my body starts going through adaptations to make it harder to lose the rest. Yes, very, very good points to bring up, Brian, because
it's like you finally figured it out, and you're like, yes, I know exactly what I need to eat each day so that I can lose weight. And then it's like, nope, now you're going to have to do less.
Yeah. And with that adaptation, I wasn't prepared to talk about this on the study, so I maybe or on the topic on the podcast, so I may be botching part of it. But there was a very recent study done where they basically measured energy adaptations in physique athletes. This one was actually quite cool, and they did males and females. They did it they measured things kind of middle of contest prep, I think very towards the end of it, one of the last couple of weeks of contest prep. And then after a recovery period, and there was adjusted expected energy expenditure calculations, because based off of things of loss of tissue and that sort of thing, they can adjust what they expect the decreases in energy expenditure to be. But what they found was that the actual energy expenditure was notably less than what they had already calculated the adjustments for. So they're okay, we expect, I'm pulling these percentages out of my ass here, so don't hold me to them. Okay, we expect energy expenditure to be decreased 10% at 190 pounds. And then what they found, it was actually another 10% under their already adjusted 10%. So it was actually 20%.
Depressing, man.
What they found. And I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. And then as you get leaner, the more that those adaptations kind of occur. And that is so much so why, so many people, right, talk about this from a lifestyle standpoint, because if you let's keep using the example of 200 pounds. At 200 pounds, you have a certain set of actions, habits, choices that put you at 200 pounds. If let's say you go through and you get down to 180 pounds, right? And you're sick, I achieved 180 pounds. I achieved my goal. In order to maintain that 180 pounds, you need to develop a new set of actions, habits, and skills to be the 180 pound version of yourself. You cannot have the actions, habits, and skills of the 200 pound version of yourself, or you will slowly just regress back to 200 pounds. And that is the problem that so many people run into.
Yeah.
Not to derail us too much. And then the kind of moving back to the traditional cut, the one thing that I do want to bring up again, it is not as unsustainable as the Minicut, but it is not sustainable from a lifestyle standpoint. And to tack this onto the back of that example I just used, let's say to get to that 180 pounds, you end up eating, 1,950 calories or something like that. That 1,950 calories is not maintenance at 180 pounds. We overshoot to continue facilitating progress at a rate of loss that falls between that 0.5% to 1%. And then when you no longer want to facilitate loss, that you kind of then readjust into what is actually a maintenance calorie there. And I think that is something that so many people get confused, right? Especially if they maybe hire a shitty coach or they are winging it themselves or whatever. And they're like, well, when I was, 180 pounds, I was eating 180 grams of protein, 120 grams of carbs, and like 50 grams of fat. I'm just making these macros up, by the way. So if I want to get back to there, maybe they stop tracking or the holidays happened, I just need to go back to that. And or if I want to stay there, I need to stay at these calories or in these number of macros. And that is not how that works. There is adjustments based off things like your rate of gain, the adaptations and stuff that take place. So it always is a floating calculation and a moving target, the best way to put it there.
I have a quick question on this. So if you're descending down in body weight and say this example that you're using, you get to 180 pounds and you're at 1,900 calories, and say you get stuck there, say you're stuck there for a number of weeks, do you then assume that 1,900 is in fact your maintenance? Or because the natural inclination would be, well, you're in a deficit, so we'll turn around to say 2,300, 2,400, and you should still be able to maintain your weight at this higher caloric number with the assumption that you were in a deficit. But how long do you need to be at that number and not see any further weight loss before that just becomes your new maintenance?
So the first thing is of this 1,900 calories, is that a true 1,900 calories? Do you have logs that are representative of this? How honest have you been there? That always has to be the first conversation, the first part of the conversation. Second, how are you making up that 1,900 calories, right? Like this is one, especially with like newer clients and stuff, I give them the reins a little bit. I see what they come up with, and then I start to rope it in, right? Because sometimes what I'll see is like, I'm super, super hungry. We're doing like 4 protein shakes a day. And I'm like, this is not going to work the way you think it's going to work. Like, we're going to have to eat some chicken and turkey and beef and lean fish and that sort of thing. Of how can we better distribute those 1,900 calories? Can we get a little bit more thermic effective feeding? Can we get, higher fiber, different things like that? So that's the next thing I'll do is move into that. And then potentially it might not be necessarily like actually maintenance, but it might not be large of a deficit to produce a tangible week over week notice in fat loss. Like, let's say our average loss is like for 2 weeks is like 1/10 of a pound, right? It's like, is that maintenance? Potentially, that's within very small margin of error of things. But what we might need is a larger deficit to further continue to facilitate fat loss at a rate that isn't a snail's pace sort of thing.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And the one thing that I will say there, and this is purely from just coaching experience, is there's going to be like the macro calculators and maintenance calculators and stuff are ballparks, but there are always going to be people who are far outside that. Like I will routinely have 2 guys, approximate same numbers or approximate same biometric numbers, right? Let's use Brian and I's example, right? 5'10", 5'11", about 190 pounds plus or minus. One guy will be able to be ticking off that fat loss week over week at like 2,700 calories. That other guy will need to go down to like the 2,250. That was something like early in my coaching career. I'm like, I don't believe you. Like, let show me your log sort of thing. But we are going to have individual variation, and sometimes it is kind of wild to actually see. But when you see people who are logging their food damn good, they're following what you tell them to, like sometimes they just need a lot less calories. And hunger is a really, really good way to help kind of help you with navigating those fears of taking someone low. Like if we're on 2,200 calories and I'm like, how's hunger? And they're like, I'm not really that hungry. That's probably an indication that they literally just might need less food to further facilitate the fat loss.
A perfect example, I think, of the dichotomy that exists between different types of people is looking at Alberto Nunez and Eric Helms, where Eric Helms' stage weight is 180 and he was down to like 1,700 calories weekly average. I think he had like one high day at 2,300 and all the other days were like 1,400 or something crazy like that at 180 pounds body weight. And then on the other spectrum, you have Alberto, who competed at 160. And I think he said his lowest calories were like 2,700 throughout his diet or something crazy like that. So it really is just so individual.
It is individual, and something new that I have zero research on this, right? So I am purely speculating. Things that I've noticed in like podcasts and little bits that I've picked up from people who've been in this game, like the dieting and competing game for a long time, is I think the more cycles that you go through it, the bigger the adaptations get, and that you end up like maintaining your body weight on much less calories, but then ultimately you need to push much further in those calorie deficits sort of thing. So again, full kind of disclosure here. To my knowledge, there's no research on that. That's kind of purely an anecdotal thing that I've just kind of picked up on listening to certain people in podcasts, like people that are quite large and like, oh, maintenance calories are like 2,700. And I'm like, what? How? You're like 230 pounds, like very, very, very lean. How are your maintenance calories 2,700 sort of thing? So that was another one, but they've all been people who've done this for very, very, very long times, of many rounds of the cut, bulk, contest, prep cycle sort of thing.
Yeah. Cool.
Anything else on this one, Brian? I think we kind of covered, or no, I forgot the pros and cons, right? So the pros of the traditional cut, you can cover a much larger amount of fat loss. The pro is that it is much less aggressive and slightly more sustainable for a longer period of time than the other one, because you have a much more open-ended timeline. Things like a diet break for maybe a weekend away or a wedding somewhere, those sorts of things can easily be factored in. Excuse me. And it gives you much more, your margins for success are bigger than the mini cut in terms of variation, maybe having like a scheduled free meal per week or 2 free meals per week, those sorts of things there. On the cons side of thing, you have to dedicate much more of your life, a particular season of your life, to adhering to the calorie deficit. It will have a much longer, prolonged impact on navigating social situations in those sorts of things. And that it generally, I find the rates of success are smaller because of the more subjective decision making around like, can I fit this in this week? Can I fit this in? And because the deficits aren't as large, they get cloudy in terms of like a lot of the incidence of non-progress weeks are much more to be found in a traditional fat loss phase as opposed to a mini cut, because of the psychological framing of, we have 6 weeks, I need 100% adherence, no alcohol, that sort of thing, versus, with a 3-month, you that framing and container isn't there. And oftentimes the decision-making isn't adequate to further facilitate the fat loss every single week.
Sweet. I have 2 hopefully quick follow-up questions.
Sure.
Do you think that there is an avatar that is more likely to be better suited to a long cut or a mini cut? And possibly, does this relate to training age, the amount of time in the game? Like for somebody in 20 plus years experience like me, like, would you be more likely to recommend one or the other, assuming it's like a lifestyle client that doesn't have to get ready for, you know, some sort of event or show or something like that?
I would say the like younger, single, less commitments, less external commitment sort of person, who's much more like really into that phase of life of like, I want to make the most gains, is probably better suited to the mini cut. The longer kind of advanced male, like the risk there is the catabolization of fat-free mass that, you know, we worked so fucking hard to get at this stage of a training age. We know the faster you lose, the likelihood of you losing fat-free mass is higher. So that one comes into play. And then in terms of like let's call it like the middle-aged woman who has a family and a career to balance, that sort of thing, slashing, you know, calories damn near 40% is what may be necessary on someone that already has a lot on their plate. They're not in their mid-20s anymore. The impact of that on others around you is notably more, and it is harder. And the quick fat loss is, in my opinion, in many cases, probably not worth the risk of the fallout of other things around it.
Cool. No, I dig that. And then the last question is, I know you're not a huge fan of intermittent fasting in general, but it would seem that if you're going to do this aggressive mini cut and you need to make sacrifices because you just have to create this caloric deficit, if you had, like, say, a male client that was up for it and, you know, maybe suggested it, maybe prefers to just not eat breakfast or go longer periods of time without eating, like, would the mini cut be a suitable time for somebody to do intermittent fasting as a way to just slice a meal and cut calories really quickly?
I mean, is it a way? Yes. Is it an optimal way? No, because of simply what we know about, you know, muscle protein synthesis rates and hitting that bolus every like 3 to 4 hours. If we're, you know what I mean? Like, it, of course, like, what's something that I find, I was going to say funny. It's not funny. It's actually pretty damn good. Is the title of Jordan's podcast, where optimality meets practicality, or where optimal meets practical. I can't remember if there's Y's on there or not. And it's just so good. Like, what is optimal isn't always practical, and it's a spectrum, and finding where you're going to find yourself, or where you're going to find your client on that spectrum is the sweet spot. Like with that example, Brian, like, is it a viable approach? Of course it is. I think that there is enough research that would suggest that you will probably catabolize more fat-free mass with that effort. But if it gets the job done right, is where do you draw the line, sort of thing.
Yeah. Maybe the better approach is intermittent fasting, but done as like a protein sparing modified fast, where it's like a protein shake for one of the meals and then 2 kind of more robust meals. And then you're hitting your 3 boluses for MPS.
I think that would be the best. And that's probably what I would say, like, hey, how can I make this better? I'd be like, okay, we're going to stack, you know, a protein shake in the morning, protein shake, you know, maybe 2, right? Because depending on how you want to do it, like if you want to do that 12 to 8, 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. and you're having your meals at 12 p.m. and what, 6 or something like that. I might do like a protein shake at like 7 a.m., like 10:30 a.m.
Maybe 9 and 3. Then, maybe it's like 9, noon, 3 and 6 or something like that.
Yeah, even better. Yep. Yeah. I don't know why I wasn't wrapping my head around that you could have the protein shake in the eating window, but yes, that was a very good choice there.
Sweet. Well, that's all I got. You answered all my questions.
Cool. Fantastic. So I think this was a pretty solid episode covering it. I'm sure we'll get some feedback and questions and things like that. But as always, guys, thank you for listening. Brian and I will talk to you next week.